Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show engineered to take a complex stack of sources, articles, research, history, and news, and distill it into profound, actionable knowledge for you.
Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into one of the most mythologized places on Earth, a location that, for the average Western listener, exists less as a geographical reality and more as, well, a philosophical concept. Timbuktu.
Timbuktu. It really is the ultimate metaphor for the middle of nowhere, isn't it? Our sources show that English dictionaries have formally cited it as a synonym for faraway place since 1863.
Right, it's the edge of the world.
The edge of the known world, steeped in this golden mystery. And yet this metaphorical status is so strong that we actually have data showing how much people doubt it even exists.
We do. It's pretty startling. There was a 2006 survey that showed 34% of young Britons didn't even believe Timbuktu was a real city.
A third of people. Wow.
And that tension between the myth of the lost, mysterious golden city and the documented historical reality, that's what we are here to unpack today. Because historically, Timbuktu was never the edge of the map. It was the absolute dynamic center of trade, wealth, and scholarship for medieval West Africa.
So our mission is to move beyond that metaphor. We're synthesizing everything we have. 16th century eyewitness accounts, like from Leo Africanus, geographical data, economic history, and maybe most urgently, recent UNESCO reports and updates on the security and climate crises Timbuktu is facing right now.
It's a phenomenal story of a city that, against just overwhelming environmental and political odds, managed to create and sustain one of the world's great intellectual centers. And its citizens are still fighting to make sure that legacy survives.
Okay, let's unpack this. Timbuktu's power, it seems, was dictated entirely by its geography. What was it about this specific, seemingly isolated spot that allowed it to become the nucleus of all that commerce?
The location is the absolute key, and it's a geographical compromise, really. Timbuktu sits on the southern fringe of the Sahara, only about 15 to 20 kilometers. That's 9 to 12 miles north of the Niger River.
That distance seems deliberate?
Oh, it was strategic. It placed the city close enough to the river for water and transport, but critically, it kept it safe from the annual massive flooding of the Niger.
So close enough to be connected, but far enough to stay dry. It's like the perfect junction point for two totally different economic worlds.
That's exactly it. It was this natural hub where you had the trans-Saharan desert routes coming down from the north.
Meeting the river traffic.
Exactly, meeting the river traffic from West and Central Africa. So goods coming from the desert, primarily this incredibly valuable rock salt, had to be offloaded here to meet the river traffic, bringing gold, grain, ivory, you name it, from the south. The city functioned as this non-negotiable transfer point.
And that connection to the river has always been a bit of an Achilles heel, hasn't it? The actual port, Kibara, is 8 kilometers south, but the sources emphasize that river access is perpetually under threat from the environment itself.
It's a constant battle against the land. I mean, while the Niger River's flood, which is fed by heavy rains way down in Guinea and Ivory Coast, is immense, and it peaks around Timbuktu in late December.
Right.
The physical connection through Kibara suffers from severe siltation. Over time, sand and river sediment just fill the channels, essentially choking off its access to deep water navigation.
That sounds like a constant, extremely expensive maintenance problem. Did this geological reality lead to major human intervention?
Oh, absolutely. The need to keep that connection open has been a driving force throughout its history. I mean, even into the colonial era. Our sources detail the period between 1917 and 1921 when the French colonial administration used slave labor to dig a new direct canal.
Just to link Timbuktu with the port.
Just to link it with Kibara. That effort alone shows you how vital they considered that water access to be.
But those channels don't stay open for long in a desert environment, do they?
No, they don't. That colonial canal became severely silted over the next decades, once again isolating Timbuktu from its lifeline. We even see a modern echo of this struggle in 2007.
What happened then?
There was a Libyan-funded dredging project to re-excavate that same 3-kilometer canal. The aim was to allow larger vessels, like the Kamenev passenger ferries, to reach the port. But even with modern tech, Kibara can often only function as a proper port for a few months a year, mostly December and January, when the river is at its absolute highest.
It's a really powerful reminder that the city's prosperity is built on a very fragile, fleeting connection to water.
It is, a city perpetually on the edge, constantly fighting the Sahara to keep its connection to the river.
Okay, let's move to the city's name itself, which seems just as complex as its geography. The sheer number of spellings, Tenbuk, Fambet, Timbuktu, Tombuktu, that suggests centuries of diverse interactions.
The spellings are like phonetic fingerprints of all the different cultures that interacted with it. Arabic scholars, Berber traders, European explorers. It tells you Timbuktu was always a cosmopolitan place. And what's really revealing is that the toponymy, the study of its name, gives us four competing theories about its origins.
Four different stories.
And each one reflects a different cultural perspective on who founded it or what its first function was.
Let's delve into those because they offer such distinct narratives.
So first we have the Songhay origin. This was widely accepted by early travelers. It suggests the name came from tin, meaning wall, and butu, which is often translated as hole or womb in the Songhay language.
So the Wall of the Hollow, that speaks to it being a stable, protected settlement from the start.
Exactly. The second major theory is the Berber origin, which is often championed by Malian historians. This uses the Tuareg language, and it reflects the consensus that Tuareg nomads were the first to set up a seasonal camp there. In Tuareg, tin is a feminine particle meaning place of, and buktu translates to small dune.
So, plates covered by small dunes.
Place covered by small dunes. It's much more literal given the environment. It suggests the earliest settlement was just a cluster of shelters among the shifting sands.
Right. And then we get to the most famous and maybe romanticized explanation, the one from the Tariq al-Sudan.
Yes, the local legend, the story of the slave woman.
Tell us that one.
The legend goes that when Tuareg nomads would leave for their seasonal journeys, they would leave a specific slave woman to look after their goods. Her name was Timbuktu, meaning the one having a lump in the local language, maybe referring to a physical trait. And so the spot just became known as Timbuktu, named after its faithful guardian.
That legend, whether it's true or not, it provides such a wonderful human anchor for the city's beginnings, this small, trusted depot that grows into a massive capital.
It certainly explains the name in a memorable story, which is common in oral histories. And then finally, we have a fourth theory from the French Orientalist René Basset. He suggests a Zanaga root, which is an ancient Berber language. This theory derives the name from the root BKT, meaning to be distant or hidden. Again, pointing to its remote, hollow location that made it hard to spot in the desert.
So the city is defined as a hidden depression, a place of small dunes, a walled enclosure, and named after the person who guarded it. The very origin story is complex, which is fitting for a city that became such a crossroads.
And we have to acknowledge that this ambiguity is there because the desert has literally swallowed the earliest physical evidence. Meters of sand make archaeology within the modern city incredibly difficult. But we do have proof of deep prehistory.
That's right. The sources mentioned earlier settlements.
Archaeological surveys have uncovered Iron Age settlements nearby, near the ancient Wadi system, El Amar, dating all the way back to the 5th century BC. This is vital. Timbuktu didn't just spring into existence in the 12th century. It was a strategically important site that was reborn as a trade center, built on land that has sustained human life for over 2,000 years.
Let's move to that golden age then, the era that created the legend. This period largely spanned the 13th through the 16th centuries, starting under the powerful Mali Empire.
This was the time of immense prosperity. And while the city flourished under Mali's control, the pivotal moment that really launched Timbuktu onto the world stage was the legendary Hajj of Mansa Musa around 1325.
His pilgrimage to Mecca.
Yes, and it was not just a religious obligation. It was a strategic exercise in marketing the wealth and power of the Mali Empire.
He wasn't subtle about his wealth either. The stories of him just giving away gold in Cairo are almost unbelievable.
They're breathtaking. But the sources show that Mansa Musa wasn't just dispensing gold. He was strategically investing in intellectual capital. On his way back, he recruited architects, engineers, and most importantly, scholars from across the Islamic world and brought them back to Timbuktu.
So he seeded the city with talent.
That single act cemented Timbuktu's reputation as the preeminent center of learning in West Africa.
And that influx of talent and capital, Bono, Tuaregs, Fulanis, Songhais, all converging for trade and education, that must have led to explosive growth.
It did. Scholars estimate the medieval peak population may have reached an astonishing 100,000 residents.
100,000. For comparison, what is it today?
In 2018, the population was just over 32,000. So in its golden age, Timbuktu was an immense metropolis, thriving on trade and, crucially, its intellectual infrastructure.
And that trade was built on what we call the legendary commodities, gold, ivory, and salt.
Mm.
When we talk about the economic engine, which one provided the sustained structural wealth that supported everything else?
It's interesting. While the gold from the south is what captivated the Mediterranean world and Europe, the truly essential economic spine of Timbuktu, the item that made all other trade possible, was salt.
It's a fascinating twist of economic history that rock salt was often traded ounce for ounce for gold in the South.
Its importance cannot be overstated. I mean, it was crucial for human and animal health, for preserving meat in a pre-refrigeration era. And this salt was mined from Taudeni, a deep desert center located 664 kilometers, that's 413 miles north, in the central Sahara.
The logistics to move that must have been staggering.
Just staggering. This brings us to the famous Azalai.
The salt caravans. Give us some context on the scale of these.
The Azalai were not just a few donkeys. They were enormous, highly organized camel caravans, sometimes consisting of several thousand animals. This was a brutal, epic undertaking. The round trip to Taudeni and back took about 6 weeks, 3 weeks each way across some of the world's most desolate terrain.
And what were they transporting?
Massive slabs of rock salt. Each camel would be loaded with 4 or 5 30-kilogram slabs. This constant, high-volume flow of salt south was Timbuktu's primary source of economic leverage. It gave the city immense power. Leo Africanus's observation really drives this point home.
Tell us more about that because it captures the imbalance perfectly.
Africanus reported that salt was so rare and so desperately needed south of the desert that it sold for an astronomical price, 80 ducats a load. Now, a ducat was a major European gold coin. That price tells you everything about the necessity of the commodity and the hazardous nature of the supply route.
The value is in the transportation, not the material itself.
Exactly. And this incredible gold-like value of salt is what drew the attention of the wider world and fueled those early European accounts, which, as we know, ended up distorting the city's reality.
That distortion is fundamental to the Timbuktu myth. The most influential account came from Leo Africanus.
A fascinating figure. Born in Granada, captured by pirates, given to Pope Leo X, he was then baptized and commissioned to write the comprehensive Descrizione dell'Africa.
And this book became Europe's primary source of knowledge about West Africa for nearly 2 centuries. It defined the legend.
It did, because in his description, Africanus focused heavily on the king's vast riches, feeding into that European hunger for exotic gold. He wrote explicitly of the royal treasury. Many plates and scepters of gold, some whereof weigh 1,300 pounds. He detailed the state's sophistication, noting the maintenance of 3,000 horsemen and a great store of doctors, judges, priests, and other learned men.
But if his goal was a detailed survey, why focus so heavily on the gold scepters while almost ignoring the housing? Was he intentionally feeding the myth?
It's likely a combination of his own biases and knowing his audience. European readers would have stripped out the context anyway, focusing only on the glittering details. The crucial counterpoint that everyone ignored was his observation that the common city was built of cottages built of chalk and covered with thatch.
So the wealth wasn't in the architecture?
The true wealth was in the trade and the intellectual capital. But gold makes for a much better story back in Rome.
That distinction is so important. Now, fast forward to the late 18th century, and Timbuktu is still a prize. The sources mention the account of the merchant Shabani.
Shabani's story is incredible. He was a merchant who arrived in the city in the late 18th century. After his Hajj, he was captured by Barbary pirates and eventually found his way to England, where his story was recorded in 1789.
And his account was valuable because he wasn't a European explorer. He was part of the trade network.
Exactly. He knew the system. His estimate of the native population alone was 40,000, not including slaves or foreigners, which proves the city was still substantial long after its peak. But what he described also gives us a shocking clue about environmental change.
What was the shock?
He described the environment as characterized by forest.
A forest.
Forest, which is just a world away from the arid, sand-choked desert we see today. It implies massive environmental degradation happened relatively recently, further compounding the city's modern struggles.
The desert truly consumed it. But what caused the decline from the Golden Age, even before the desert closed in?
It was a catastrophic military defeat coupled with shifting global trade. The first major blow was the Moroccan invasion in 1591. The Moroccan army, armed with firearms, defeated the Songhai Empire. Timbuktu was occupied and looted.
And they targeted the city's real commodity, its intellectual heart.
Precisely. The new rulers executed or exiled thousands of Timbuktu's leading scholars and judges in 1593, shattering the city's academic prestige. And then after 1612, the new rulers became basically independent in Morocco, but this just led to instability and conflict.
And at the same time, the world economy was fundamentally restructuring.
Yes. The 17th century saw the massive expansion of maritime trade. Increased competition from transatlantic sailing routes meant European traders could now get West African goods like gold and ivory by sea, bypassing the hazardous trans-Saharan routes entirely.
So Timbuktu's strategic bottleneck location, which had been its superpower,
Was rendered far less important. Its fate was sealed when the French incorporated it into the colony of Sudan in the 1890s.
when we talk about Timbuktu's actual enduring legacy, the true gold, we're talking about its status as an academic center, a world center of Islamic learning, often compared to places like Oxford or Athens.
And the comparison is deserved, though structure was different. Timbuktu didn't have a single unified campus. It operated on a decentralized medieval university model. Knowledge was gathered and disseminated through hundreds of informal institutions called madrasas.
How extensive was this network at its peak?
It was immense. The three main institutions, Djingaribur, Sidiaya, and Senghor, were the largest, but they were hubs for a whole network. In total, this system accommodated an estimated 25,000 students.
A quarter of the city's population were students.
A massive intellectual community, and what they studied wasn't just religious dogma. While theology and Quranic studies were foundational, the curriculum was expansive. It covered history, rhetoric, logic, astronomy, advanced mathematics, and notably, medicine.
How is this all supported in a trading city with so much instability?
It relied heavily on family patronage and endowments from wealthy merchants and judges. They would use their trade fortunes to fund the institutions. And literacy, but especially owning books, became the ultimate symbol of wealth, power, and prestige.
So books became the most valuable commodity.
Absolutely. The acquisition of manuscripts became an obsession. There was an incredibly active book trade, with texts written locally or imported at great expense from Cairo, Baghdad, Cordoba.
This book culture created the incredible volume of texts we know about today. What is the scale of this written African history?
The sheer number is hard to grasp. Hundreds of thousands of manuscripts were collected, copied, and archived over centuries. Today, libraries like the Ahmed Baba Institute and the Mama Haidara Library hold up to 700,000 manuscripts.
And these documents are the written proof of medieval West African intellectual life.
They are the best written accounts we have of pre-colonial African history, law, politics, science, you name it. They provide a vital counter-narrative to Eurocentric histories, and their survival is just a testament to the local population's dedication.
Because they survived centuries of decline and invasion by being physically hidden.
Yes, they were secreted away, hidden in cellars, buried in metal containers in the sand, or even plastered over inside the thick mud brick walls of mosques and homes. The scholarly families treated these manuscripts as irreplaceable treasures.
Which brings us to the modern crisis and the incredible act of cultural preservation during the 2012 takeover by the MNLA and the Islamist group Ansar Dine.
That moment brought the centuries-long threat to a terrifying head. When the extremist groups seized control, they viewed the ancient mausoleums and the scholarly traditions as idolatry, as shirk, and they sought to destroy these symbols of Timbuktu's heritage.
But the greatest tragedy was averted by massive, coordinated, and dangerous grassroots efforts.
It was an act of heroism. In January 2013, when troops began retaking the city, the rebels, in a final act of spite, set fire to the Ahmed Baba Institute. They destroyed about 30,000 manuscripts.
Which is a tragedy.
A terrible tragedy. But that was only a fraction of the total. The critical detail is that approximately 90% of Timbuktu's privately held manuscripts had already been safely removed before the rebels attacked.
How did they manage to move hundreds of thousands of documents out of a war zone?
It was a highly clandestine, massive logistical undertaking organized by individuals like Abdelkader Haidara and the local NGO Savama DCI. They relied entirely on private funds and immense personal risk.
What were the logistics? How did they do it?
It was low-tech and determined. They purchased nearly 2,500 standard metal footlockers. Each locker could hold up to 300 manuscripts. These were distributed to trusted families, filled with texts hidden in safe houses, and then, under the cover of darkness, they were slowly transported out of the city, often by donkey or boat, to safety in the capital. Bamako.
That is just astonishing. The international news focused on the 30,000 burned manuscripts, but the real story is the silent, organized effort that saved the other 300,000.
It proves that Timbuktu's true custodians, the scholarly families and the local community, were determined to protect their history no matter the cost.
Turning now to Timbuktu today. The contrast between that historical glory and its modern reality is just stark. It's a city of immense poverty, besieged by environmental and security crises.
It's fighting a two-front war against human conflict and relentless geography. The city is being actively swallowed by the desert. It is literally surrounded by encroaching sand dunes.
Looking at the climate data, the heat alone is brutal. Average daily maximums over 40 degrees Celsius, 104 Fahrenheit, for months on end.
And that heat is compounded by the perpetual sand problem. Streets are regularly buried. They have to constantly clear them just to move. And then there's the seasonal harmattan haze, that dry, dusty wind that just deposits more and more sand.
So rain-fed agriculture is impossible. The entire population relies on the Niger River, but they've developed unique methods for survival.
They have. The indigenous strategy revolves around African floating rice. It's a remarkable form of agriculture. The farmers sow the seeds before the flood, and as the river rises, the rice plants can grow up to 3 meters in height, keeping their heads above water.
So they're harvesting rice from a canoe, 3 meters above the ground.
Exactly. It's a method uniquely adapted to the environment. Nowadays, most local production is in irrigated areas, using Archimedes screws to pump water. But even this is largely subsistence farming for the families themselves.
And this instability has decimated tourism, which was a key economic driver.
The collapse was dramatic. Timbuktu is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognized for its ancient mud brick architecture, the 3 great mosques, the mausoleums.
And for years, those sites were a major draw.
They were, but starting around 2008, kidnappings of Western tourists began to increase in the region, and the effect was immediate and devastating. Tourist arrivals dropped from around 6,000 in 2009 to less than 500 in early 2011. The economy took a massive blow.
This vulnerability set the stage for the devastating cultural destruction in 2012 by Ansar Dine.
They systematically targeted the very symbols of the World Heritage Site. They destroyed numerous mausoleums with shovels and pickaxes, declaring them idolatry, a deviation from pure Islamic practice.
Which happened right after the city was placed back on UNESCO's list of World Heritage in danger.
A tragic race against time. The international response was critical, and UNESCO created a fund to safeguard the sites. The reconstruction efforts that followed were organized locally, using the same local masons and ancient mud brick techniques.
And unfortunately, the security situation remains critically volatile. This is not just history, it's an ongoing reality.
The sources confirm this. The situation escalated dramatically in August 2023 when the city was placed under a total blockade by the terrorist group GandM. This cut off essential supplies, causing severe food shortages and massive displacement. We know 33,000 people fled.
And the conflict continues to target key infrastructure. We have a very recent event cited.
Yes. On June 2nd, 2025, GandM militants targeted a military base with a car bomb and simultaneously shelled the Timbuktu airport with mortars. This shows they are actively undermining the government's control and targeting the very points of access necessary to break the blockade and provide aid. Timbuktu is fighting for its very survival.
Yet despite this danger, cultural and spiritual life persists. The people are resilient.
They absolutely are. The annual Maulud Festival, celebrating the Prophet Muhammad's birthday, is one of the most important occasions, and it involves the public reading of the city's most cherished manuscripts.
That's a powerful statement. Amid blockades and attacks, they gathered to publicly celebrate and read their written heritage.
It reinforces that knowledge remains at the core of the city's identity. And while bigger festivals have had to relocate, local initiatives like the Living Together Festival reinforce that community resilience.
So finally, infrastructure and language. How does a city so remote maintain any connections to the outside world?
Access is limited and challenging. It's boat, road, or air. Boats use the Niger River. Road connections are notoriously poor, though a new paved road is under construction. The airport provides the only regular access with flights to Bamako.
And the language?
The lingua franca today is Koya Chini, a Songhay language. But Arabic remains critically important. It's the language of scholarship and religion, sort of like the role of Latin in medieval Europe, maintaining that historical link to the wider Islamic world.
We began this deep dive by challenging the notion that Timbuktu is just a metaphor. What we've learned is that its power stemmed entirely from its strategic, fragile location at the junction of the gold and salt trade.
And we've seen that it's true, enduring wealth was never the physical goal that mesmerized Europe, but the intellectual capital. It sustained this incredibly sophisticated system of madrasas and preserved a legacy of up to 700,000 manuscripts.
And in the modern era, Timbuktu is defined by its fight for survival against the crushing sand of the desert and the destructive ideology of extremists.
Understanding Timbuktu helps us to fundamentally contextualize the complexity and academic fervor of medieval West Africa, moving us away from simplistic narratives that often overlook the continent's contributions.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and a final thought for you to carry forward. Despite the immense modern struggles, the blockades, the poverty, the destruction of revered sites, the collective heroic effort to save hundreds of thousands of texts means that Timbuktu's history is not just preserved in crumbling mud architecture. It remains a living, active, and accessible intellectual heritage.
So if knowledge, law, history, and culture are considered the highest and most valuable of all human commodities, then the question remains: is Timbuktu, in its truest and most profound sense, still a golden city? The answer, secured within those thousands of metal footlockers, might very well be yes.
Food for thought indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.